Well, Democrats continue to be in denial about the consequences of the 2024 election. Joe Biden is off somewhere wandering in the woods, refusing to answer questions from the media. Remember, that guy's still the president of the United States. I know. We were supposed to forget about him after he died in a debate against Donald Trump. That was way back in July. Well, now it turns out he's still president of the United States and still doing things, as we'll get to in just a little bit. Some of those things may not be wonderful over in Ukraine with regard to Russia, but he's still not talking to the media, and still Democrats can't figure out exactly why they lost. Here was Joe Biden. Apparently, it was his birthday, and that was an excuse for him not to talk to the media, just like every other day of the year.
Mr. President, happy early birthday! For your birthday, will you talk to us, sir? As a gift to the press, will you please talk to us? Mr. President, President Biden! Please, we haven't heard from you all trip! Mr. President!
The desperate screaming from the press for Biden to talk. Please tell us it's all okay, Mr. President. Please don't just walk away. He's 82 years old, and he can't hear you. That brain ain't been functioning for quite a while. It is fun to watch the Democrats go at each other in the aftermath of this drubbing. Perhaps the best clip going around the internet is courtesy of Piers Morgan's show. Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks was on with Alan Lichtman. Alan Lichtman, of course, became famous for his 13 keys. He uses these sort of bizarre concepts to determine who he thinks is going to win the presidency. He decided throughout the election cycle that Kamala Harris was going to win. That was after he suggested Joe Biden was going to win. And of course, none of that was true. It is a rare day when Cenk and I agree thoroughly, but this clip is just too good to ignore. Here is Cenk Uygur and Alan Lichtman going at it like two dogs in a dogfight.
Look, I debated Professor Lichtman before. I told him his theories about the keys were absurd. I was right. He was wrong. I said he'd lose his keys.
No, you were
Couldn't
not
find
right,
him
and
before
I
the
was
election.
not wrong. And that's a cheap shot, and I won't stand for it.
Well, who won, brother?
You should not be
Who
taking
won?
cheap
Who
shots
won?
at me.
Who
You
won?
want to make your
You
point,
live
make your
in a
point.
total
Don't make it
world of
personal.
denial.
I read your own followers' comments, and they all trashed you, every one of them, and supported me.
Yeah,
so quiet with your personal attacks.
come find out again.
Make whatever point you want. Don't
Look,
make it personal.
You don't know anything. You're so deluded.
Right. I've only been a professor for 51 years.
On this program, I've never been able to finish a thought.
How many books have you published? No, because you're personally attacking me again.
Good times over on the Democratic left. By the way, Donald Trump's transition approval rating, 54%, according to Echelon Insights. His disapproval at 38%. So for all of the freak out that's going on the left, turns out most Americans pretty much okay with things so far. And I think that the thing to understand about Trump is that Trump is, like the Batman, vengeance. Right? That is the theme of Trump, too. Now, Trump has said that before, right? He says, I am your vengeance. And that's taken by the left to mean that he's just going to jail his political opponents, that he's going to use all of the aspects of government to go against the people that he hates. But that's not what he means. When he says that Trump is your vengeance, what he means is that the American people has been victimized by a small group of elitists who have decided that their morality is superior to those of Americans and that they ought to be able to rule every area of American life using their pseudo expertise. And he is the revenge of the normie. He's the revenge of the common man. He is vengeance. And that vengeance continues to just tread across the American body politic. And take a sort of frivolous example. So there's a hot fight that is now broken out in the House of Representatives over a representative who calls himself Sarah McBride. I say that because Sarah McBride is a man named Tim McBride and changed his name to Sarah and is now a trans person and insists on using the ladies' bathroom, even though, of course, he's a dude. Well, Nancy Mace, who is a female, as in a biological female, she has now sponsored a rule on the House floor that would say, if you're a lady, you ought to use the ladies' room. And if you're a dude, you ought to use the dude's room. And here's Nancy Mace explaining her position on this.
Is this effort in response to Congresswoman McBride's coming to Congress?
Yes, and absolutely, and then some. I'm not going to stand for a man, if someone with a penis is in the women's locker room, that's not okay. And I'm a victim of abuse myself. I'm a rape survivor. I have PTSD from the abuse I've suffered at the hands of a man. And I know how vulnerable women and girls are in private spaces. So I'm absolutely 100% going to stand in the way of any man who wants to be in a women's restroom, in our locker rooms, in our changing rooms. I will be there fighting you every step of the way. That
is Nancy Mace being very clear, very concise, and very brutally honest. This, of course, has pissed off Hakeem Jeffries, who is the Democratic minority leader still. He had aspirations to be the Speaker of the House, but then again, he didn't actually win a majority. Here he was being very upset about all of this.
As Catherine Clark indicated, the notion that this incoming small House Republican conference majority is beginning to transition to the new Congress by bullying a member of Congress. This is what we're doing. This is the lesson that you've drawn.
Well, I mean, it seems like the lesson that you guys have drawn is to continue to maintain an absolute falsehood. And that falsehood has been pervaded throughout our culture, throughout our society, to the point where you are afraid to say basic things in common spaces like boys are boys and girls are girls. And it's so pervasive that it's been taken up by major advertisers, been taken up by major companies, like, for example, Jaguar. So there's an ad for Jaguar that's going around that is absolutely puzzling and bewildering. I don't know what they mean by this ad. There's literally no car in the ad. Jaguar, of course, is a car company, or used to be. This is an ad for just weirdos or something. I'll explain what's going on because you can't see it all if you're not viewing the show, which you should. Here's what's going on in this ad. Okay, this is just a black person wearing a bizarre outfit, and then another black person wearing a bizarre dress, and then a white person wearing a bizarre outfit. It says delete ordinary, and now you have what appears to be a trans woman wearing a bizarre outfit. So it's just a group of strange people dressed bizarrely, staring into the camera, and then it says copy nothing. Jaguar. There's no car in the ad. Okay, can I just say that we're all tired of this? Like, we're truly tired of it. First of all, it looks like something out of Zoolander. But second of all, like, we're all tired of this. We're done. Like, just as a civilization, I think that it is safe to say that when you have a norm, when you have a center to a civilization, people who don't actually abide by the rules of the center, it's actually not hard to tolerate those people as part of the system, because obviously if you have a center of gravity, then you have planets that are going to circle that center of gravity. When you decide, as the left has decided to do over the course of my lifetime, to destroy the center of gravity, when the center no longer holds, when instead the norm has been destroyed in the name of the fringe, well, eventually a new gravity will form. Eventually there will be a new center. And that new center, well, it turns out that the bulk of people, particularly in America, are still normies. And that new center is going to look a lot like the old center. And that is what is happening right now. That is what's happening with Team Trump. And the political effect of that is that if the left pushed too far in one direction, now the snapback is coming. So to take a wonderful example, Jay Bhattacharya is now being considered as a possible candidate to lead the National Institutes of Health. That is just wonderful. So we had Dr. Bhattacharya on very early in this program when he started becoming much more prominent on the national scene. He was the leader of something called the Great Barrington Declaration. The Great Barrington Declaration was a sort of heterodox view of what should be done about COVID. He suggested, instead of these gigantic lockdowns, instead of mask mandates and all the rest, effectively speaking, you should do what actually I had suggested quite early on in the pandemic. We should tranche out populations by health into the general public and allow those people to get COVID because they would live and they would be fine. And it would eventually create a general immunity to COVID, which is effectively what happened, because despite all the attempts to immunize the population and prevent the spread, the immunity didn't actually hold to prevent spread. It may have mitigated the effects of COVID for people who are very obese or very old, but for most people, it didn't stop you from getting COVID or transmitting COVID in the first place. And so what actually ended the COVID threat, such as it was Omicron, was the commonality of a far milder strain of the virus. And Bhattacharya had basically recommended a strategy that would have produced precisely that, but faster. And he was ripped up and down. In fact, Dr. Anthony Fauci had used his assets at the NIH in order to prevent the work of the Great Barrington Declaration from being promulgated anywhere. He attempted to silence the voices surrounding the Great Barrington Declaration, including Dr. Bhattacharya. As the Washington Post reports, when 3 academics in October 2020 insisted it was time to roll back COVID lockdowns, writing an open letter known as the Great Barrington Declaration that attracted hundreds of thousands of signatures, public health leaders rebuked their proposal as premature. Francis Collins, then director of the NIH, privately dismissed the authors as fringe experts and called for a takedown of their suggestions to reopen schools and businesses, according to emails subsequently released under the Freedom of Information Act. Now, one of the authors of the declaration, Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University, appears poised for a top government health role, perhaps as head of NIH itself. Bhattacharya is a strong candidate to lead the nearly $50 billion agency in the coming Trump administration, with his name on an internal list of contenders being compiled by RFK Jr. The rise of Bhattacharya represents how the backlash to coronavirus policies has helped reshape conservative politics and elevate new voices. Well, the reality is so many of our institutions have been corrupted. That includes business institutions. Have you ever thought about what charities and causes the brands you give your hard-earned money to support actually support? Well, Pure Talk, my cell phone company, supports veterans. They're leading the fight against woke corporations. Pure Talk is veteran-led. They actually put their money where their mouth is. They've alleviated $10 million in veterans' debt. They donate tens of thousands of dollars every month to help prevent veteran suicide. They just donated $50,000 to Mike Rowe Works, providing scholarships to veterans learning trades after active duty. Pure Talk gives you the exact same coverage as the big carriers, America's most dependable 5G network, for literally half the cost. Why are you still giving your money to Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile when there's a better option that actually supports our veterans? And when you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk on a qualifying plan, you'll get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. That means unlimited access to our incredible library of content. Am I Racist? What is a Woman? Mr. Bertram Run Hide Fight, plus uncensored ad-free daily shows, and 1 year free of our new kids platform, Bentkey. The only way you can get this special offer is by going to puretalk.com/Shapiro or call and mention my name. Stop overpaying for your cell phone plan. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro today. Switch to a qualifying plan. Get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. Also, let's talk about something that affects all of us responsible, hardworking Americans. Taxes. The October 15th deadline has passed. Are you prepared for what's coming now? Do you owe back taxes? Are your tax returns still unfiled? Missed the deadline to file for an extension? Well, now that October 15th is behind us, the IRS may be ramping up enforcement. Let me tell you, they do not play around. You could face wage garnishments, frozen bank accounts, even property seizures if you haven't taken action yet. But there's good news. There's still hope. Tax Network USA has been in the game for years. They know exactly how to navigate the complex world of tax law. They've helped taxpayers save over $1 billion in tax debt. They filed over 10,000 tax returns. That's billion with a B, folks. They specialize in helping hardworking Americans like you reduce their tax burdens. So don't let the IRS catch you off guard and get ahead of this right now with Tax Network USA. Their team of professionals will work tirelessly to protect your assets and find the best solution for your unique situation. Here's what you need to do. For a complimentary consultation, call today 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Bhattacharya has testified before Congress about the crackdown on him. He offered advice to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, my home state governor, and other leaders navigating the pandemic. And Bhattacharya, of course, has won a wide variety of allies ranging from Peter Thiel to Elon Musk. And again, people like me were pushing Jay Bhattacharya's work pretty much as soon as he issued it back in October of 2020. He is the backlash. He is the vengeance. If you pervert the NIH and turn the NIH into a thoroughly political outfit dedicated to shutting down opposition viewpoints on the science, well, when Trump comes in, he's going to take the person you victimized and put him in charge of the NIH. The same thing is true of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's been ripped up and down for a variety of reasons. He's had heterodox and sometimes bizarre opinions on a wide variety of health issues. The reason that he is in position to take over HHS now is because the left decided to be so censorious about their approach to science that they actually ripped out any credibility that the scientific institutions had. When you have Anthony Fauci on TV suggesting that to disagree with him is to disagree with science, as though he is some sort of great prophet descended from on high. Well, the vengeance is going to be RFK Jr. Even the Wall Street Journal is now pointing this out. They say the rise of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from fringe figure to the prospective head of U.S. health policy was fueled by skepticism and distrust of the medical establishment. People once dismissed for their disbelief in conventional medicine are now celebrating a new champion in Washington. Scientists, meanwhile, are trying to figure out how they could have managed the pandemic without setting off a populist movement they say threatens long-standing public health measures. Well, again, there was no way to prevent that if you insisted on top-down, heavy-handed control. And no matter how tighter they grip the galaxy, the more star systems will slip through their fingers. That seems to be the message that the Trump vengeance is bringing. Now, again, there could be backlash to the backlash. If, as I expressed yesterday on the show, there is a Newton's third law of politics, that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If Republicans push too hard in one direction, then presumably there will be a backlash to that as well. But for now, what we are watching is a backlash to terrible policy, to public policy decided by scientists not on the basis of science. And again, it ran roughshod throughout the scientific community. One of the great untold stories of 2024 is how it's a backlash to the COVID regime of 2020. So to take another example, this week, Laura Helmuth resigned as editor-in-chief of Scientific American, the oldest continuously published magazine in the United States, according to Reason magazine. Now, Helmuth did a horrible job. She probably ended up leaving after she put up a rant on Blue Sky, which is sort of left-wing Twitter, about Donald Trump. And she accused Generation X of, quote, being full of effing fascists, complaining about how her home state of Indiana was sexist and racist. And she said, quote, F them to the moon and back. But the reality, of course, is that Scientific American went under her tutelage from being a place where you actually read about science to a place where you read about politics. Scientific American ran a piece called Denial of Evolution is a Form of White Supremacy, which is absolutely absurd. Scientific American, while she was running it, suggested that the normal distribution is inherently suspect. Normal distribution just looks like a bell curve. According to Reason, 3 days after the legendary biologist and author E.O. Wilson died, Scientific American published a surreal hit piece about him in which the author lamented, quote, his dangerous ideas on what factors influence human behavior. The author explained, the so-called normal distribution of statistics assumes there are default humans who act as the standard that the rest of us can be accurately measured against. And that goes back to the Jaguar point. It goes back to the trans point. Get rid of the normal, and what you end up with is not a new normal. You end up with just a fringe. You end up with a discombobulated fringe running things, and nobody likes that. This is what Scientific American dedicated itself to doing. It's what Nature magazine, by the way, dedicated itself to doing. Nature, probably the most prestigious scientific journal on planet Earth, blew itself out by making political pronouncements. That is how you end up with RFK Jr. The Washington Post actually has a piece and a podcast up from Leanna Wen and a wide variety of other columnists over at the Washington Post called RFK Jr. has some good ideas. It's what makes him so dangerous. Now, again, him having good ideas is not what makes him dangerous to them. It's the fact that he is more skeptical of scientific doctrine than they have been. And you know what? Again, there could be an overcorrection, but the reality is that it is long overdue. The reaction is long overdue, and it's true on nearly every issue. And Donald Trump is a reaction to the open borders left. The LA City Council, they're so disconnected from reality, and the backlash is here. When it comes to immigration policy, the LA City Council has now voted unanimously, according to Bill Malugin of Fox, to adopt a sanctuary ordinance that will prohibit the use of any city personnel or resources for any federal immigration enforcement. LAPD's new chief says his officers will not participate in federal immigration enforcement. Former LA Mayor Eric Garcetti issued an executive order in 2019 to protect illegal immigrants. LAPD is already prohibited from asking about immigration status when they arrest people, which means that you have illegal immigrants who are criminals in the city of Los Angeles who are wandering around. The ordinance puts those sanctuary policies on the city's books. Okay, well, the backlash to that is Tom Homan, who is now going to enforce the law. The backlash is thorough and it is well-deserved. In the world of defense, the woking of the American military, the backlash to that is Pete Hegseth. So Mike Gallagher, former representative from Wisconsin, who himself served in the military and who I've recommended as a possible fantastic Secretary of the Navy under Pete Hegseth, he heartily supports Hegseth. Why? Well, because he recognizes, like everybody else who's a military policy expert, that the administrative state, the woke military, by administrative fiat, is a disaster area. And so Donald Trump is here to wreak vengeance upon it. Here is Mike Gallagher.
And Pete Hegseth is a patriot. You obviously know him better than I do. Some people are criticizing the pick as disruptive. Well, the Pentagon is in need of disruption. And I think taking a hard look at the Pentagon bureaucracy, finding a way to reduce the almost 900,000 DoD civilians and reinvest that money into weapons and warfighters and more realistic training, finding a way to fix and grow the United States Navy, sharpen the tooth and automate the tail. These are all things that an innovative Secretary of Defense can do. But it all starts with a clear-eyed view of the enemies we face and a willingness to stand up to them.
Hey, again, Gallagher would make a great Secretary of the Navy. There need to be people in these positions who are going to clean out these authoritarian administrative institutions. Again, it's the great untold story of the last over a century in American politics, is the takeover of administrative institutions and the perversion of those administrative institutions against their original causes. The same thing is going to happen in the world of education. So President Trump has now called upon Linda McMahon as his education secretary. Now, it's amazing how the media are covering this. They're, of course, treating her as the ex-wife of former WWE CEO Vince McMahon. But the reality, of course, is that McMahon has already served as the transition co-chair and former Small Business Administration head. She's also been the chair of the board at the America First Policy Institute, which is sort of the think tank that is outside the government that has been coming up with a lot of the Trump agenda. Trump said in a statement, for the past 4 years as chair of the board at AFPI, Linda has been a fierce advocate for parents' rights, working hard at both AFPI and America First Works to achieve universal school choice in 12 states, giving children the opportunity to receive an excellent education, regardless of zip code or income. As Secretary of Education, Linda will fight tirelessly to expand choice to every state in America and empower parents to make the best education decisions for their families. Okay, that, of course, is in fact the best thing that she could do. If you want the number one predictor of movement in the electorate, it would be the possibility of school choice, taking kids out of the hands of the absolutely corrupt and terrible National Educational Association and putting them in the hands of parochial schools because parents wish to send their kids to better schools. There's very little that would be better for the children of America than universal school choice. I know I live in a universal school choice state, Florida, and it's made the state way the hell better because it's a state built for kids. It is a state built around kids. Universal school choice, fostered at the federal level, made easier at the federal level, would be a wonderful thing. If the Department of Education isn't to be eliminated completely, and it's kind of difficult to eliminate departments, it requires 60 votes in the Senate in order to do that. If you're not going to do that, at least the Department of Education can be thoroughly cleansed. And that means not just universal school choice. She's going to be looking at college endowments, as she should. If they're in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as many of them are with regard to allowing anti-Semitism, for example, their endowments should be looked at. The system must be broken. Not only that, the truth is that FAFSA, which is the federal student loan program, should be looked at to determine whether, in fact, we are incentivizing people to take on debt that they can never pay back. Is that a smart thing to continue to propagate a system that gets people hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, no matter how long it takes to pay off, just to get a degree in a useless subject when in reality they should just be looking at entering the workforce? Beyond that, she I would assume, is also going to take a look at Title IX. Right? She's going to be looking at Title IX policies. One of the terrible things that has been switched since the Trump administration is that there are vague accusations made against particularly men on college campuses. There are no actual administrative procedures that are put in place for sexual harassment accusations. And then their lives are ruined because those accusations are just used as an excuse to destroy their educational career. Trump 1 fixed that. I assume that Trump 2 will do that as well. And when it comes to foreign policy, Donald Trump is the vengeance that is long overdue. We'll get to more on that in just a moment. First, did you know you spend about a third of your life sleeping? That's around 25 years of your life in bed. With numbers like that, your mattress isn't just furniture, it's an investment in your own well-being. That's where Helix Sleep comes in. I never thought a mattress could make such a big difference until I actually tried Helix. What sets them apart? Well, unlike the one-size-fits-all brands, Helix offers 20 different mattress options because they understand everybody's sleep needs are unique. It starts with their sleep quiz, a game changer for finding your perfect match. When I mentioned my struggle with lower back pain on softer mattresses, they recommended their medium firm option. The result? I'm sleeping like a baby. If you're looking for that cloud-like feeling, try their Luxe. If you want the ultimate sleep experience, go for the Elite. If you need extra support, the Helix Plus has you covered. Forget those awkward mattress store visits. Helix delivers right to your door. Helix is so confident in their product, they give you 100 nights to try it out, risk-free. There's over 3 months to test your mattress in the real world. Plus, every mattress comes with a 10 to 15-year warranty. So, if you want to sleep the way I do, head over to helixsleep.com/Ben. Take that sleep quiz. Plus, Helix is offering up to 25% off site-wide and 2 free dream pillows with any mattress purchase. Even better, Helix is offering a free bedding bundle. That's 2 dream pillows, a sheet set, a mattress protector with any Luxe or Elite mattress order. That's right. Just go to helixsleep.com/Ben. That's helixsleep.com/Ben. With Helix, better sleep starts right now. Also, maybe the number one question I get from listeners is, how can I get in the conservative fight? Well, it's very important to know where your dollars are going because most credit cards actually funnel millions to left-wing causes and candidates, hoping you're not going to notice. But here's the thing. Now you have a choice. Coin is America's conservative credit card. Find them at COIGN.com. With every transaction, you advance conservative causes and charities at no cost to you. Coin empowers us to take back our country with every swipe. And it's a great-looking credit card you'll take pride in using. It's bright red with We the People on the front. Coin works everywhere Visa is accepted and comes with a 100% U.S.-based customer service and consumer protection. Thousands of patriots are earning cash back while fighting the liberal agenda. The demand is so high, there's now a wait list. It's a movement. Join it. Go to COIGN.com and join the wait list today. Be sure to select Daily Wire in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Terms apply. Go to coin.com/disclosures for full details. So, if you wish to have a credit card that looks great and also doesn't mean you're spending money on causes you don't support, head on over to COIGN.com right now. That's coin.com. Join the waitlist. Get involved and select Daily Wire in the How Did You Hear About Us section. So on his way out of office, Joe Biden is once again, just as Democrats do, I don't know what their obsession is with this, but Democrats have a habit. On their way out of office, Joe Biden did this, is doing this now. Barack Obama, of course, did this pretty famously when he left office in 2016. On their way out, they just take a backhanded slap at Israel. Maybe it's to please the progressive base. I have to assume that's what it is, considering Bernie Sanders is calling for a full-on arms embargo against the state of Israel as Israel is within sniffing distance of full-on defeating Hamas and full-on defeating Hezbollah in Lebanon. Well, now, apparently, the UN Security Council is slated to vote on an alleged anti-Israel resolution published by Algeria to impose an end on the Jewish state's war of self-defense against Hamas. And now the Biden administration has gone silent about how it's going to vote. This is according to Fox News. The irony of the notoriously anti-Israel Algeria devising the resolution recalls the witty line of the late Israeli ambassador to the UN, Abba Eban, who said, quote, if Algeria introduced a UN resolution declaring the earth was flat and Israel had flattened it, it would pass by a vote of 164-13 with 26 abstentions. Well, that's right. So Senator Ted Cruz says this resolution is just one of several assaults on Israel being planned at the UN, meant to preemptively and permanently undermine the incoming Trump administration and Republican Congress. Apparently, Fox News Digital reported last week that UN experts believe Biden's administration might seek to replicate Obama's parting shot at Israel. A U.S. State Department spokesperson told Fox News Digital, quote, we don't have a comment to offer on allegedly leaked information, nor do we preview our actions at the Security Council. So, again, the pending draft resolution, it's a little bit unclear what exactly that looks like, but apparently it is going to call for a unilateral end to the war in Gaza, rip Israel on a humanitarian basis, and basically make no demands that are in any way enforceable with regard to the release of hostages. Well, the backlash is here and it's coming. It is coming fast. And it should come. Again, Democrats right now are completely split on this issue. Some Democrats like Bernie Sanders, who hates Israel and is, again, about as Jewish as a ham sandwich, they continue to rip on Israel at every available opportunity. Even the New York Times is noticing the gap inside the Democratic Party. Quote, Democrats whose support for Israel has been strained by the wars in Gaza and Lebanon appear headed for a series of tests in the coming weeks over continuing to back Israel's right-wing government and the attendant debate over anti-Semitism and the anti-Israel left. Again, it's hilarious that every time the New York Times or any other publication talks about the Israeli government and Gaza and Lebanon, they talk about Israel's right-wing government. Let me be clear about this. There is absolute unanimity across the aisle in Israel on the reality that Hamas has to be defeated, the hostages have to be returned, and Lebanon has to be made a non-threatening presence on Israel's northern border. That is not an area of controversy in Israel. It isn't. People in the center, people on the left agree with that. In fact, there are some people in the center and left who want to go more aggressively in Lebanon than the current government is going. Nonetheless, Democrats, because again, they are tied, they're wedded to this pro-Hamas base, they can't let go of it. According to the New York Times, Senator Chuck Schumer is likely to test the unity of the Democratic Party and American Jews who have long called it their political home. He plans to attach to a bill legislation to define anti-Semitism formally with language that includes his phrases more about opposition to Israel than about hatred of Judaism. Well, he's doing that, obviously, much too late. Not just that. Of course, you see that these UN resolutions are going to be dividing the Democratic Party as well. Well, all of that is going to come to a crashing halt as soon as Republicans take office. The incoming Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, he says, listen, as soon as this administration is gone, something different is on its way.
I'm calling on Leader Schumer to bring a bill to the floor sanctioning the ICC, which the House has already passed on a bipartisan basis. And if he refuses to act, our Senate Republican majority next year will. We will stand with Israel and make this and other supportive legislation a top priority in the next Congress. So to our allies in Israel and to the Jewish people around the world, my message to you is this: reinforcements are on the way.
Again, he doesn't mean that in terms of military reinforcements. He just means that the Republican Senate is not going to be standing for the kind of trash being pushed by the outgoing Biden administration. The backlash is here. That is also true with regard to economics. And the Biden administration decided that the way to actually heal the American economy was to artificially boost the price of labor. That is why you saw Joe Biden on, for example, picket lines. It's why you saw Joe Biden intervene multiple times in labor disputes on behalf of unions that were paying the freight for his reelect campaign. It's why Joe Biden decided to blow trillions of dollars into an already overheated economy. Well, the American people were tired of that. They didn't like it very much. And the thing about Donald Trump is he is an economic pragmatist. He will do what works. So there's been all this talk, this loose talk about how Donald Trump is going to levy 20% tariffs across the board, no matter what. And let me be real about this. He ain't going to do that. What he's going to do is what he thinks is going to make the economy stronger, Because what Donald Trump understands, better than virtually anyone in American politics, is that the only solution is victory. What works is what works. If tariffs are going to damage the economy, he ain't going to do it. And if tariffs are going to help the economy, he's going to do it. If tariffs are leverage against foreign opposition, he will use them. And if they turn out to be useless, he will not use them, which is why he's currently considering a person named Kevin Warsh as a new candidate to serve as Treasury Secretary. According to Politico, Warsh, who's a leading contender for the job, once served in President George W. Bush's White House and then as the youngest Federal Reserve Board member in the central bank's history. He has spoken about the importance of free trade, the political independence of the Fed, and a strong dollar. Warsh has a few things in common with the president, however. Wall Street would love it if he got the job. His father-in-law, Ronald Lauder, is a decades-long friend of President Trump. He's already playing a key role within the transition. Even some of the most populist members of Trump's coalition are embracing him. One former Trump administration official said, quote, bringing people like Kevin in would demonstrate that the broad coalition of support Trump has assembled across the country is equally broad among those in the business world. Now, again, there is some blowback to some of the more tariff-friendly members of the Trump administration. However, the reality is that even if Donald Trump were to pick Warsh, that doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be pro-free trade. He's going to do what he feels he has to do. Remember, he used all this language about tariffs the first time around, and then he used it mainly as leverage to get America's geopolitical opponents over to the table. Meanwhile, Howard Lutnick, who had been considered as a possible Treasury Secretary, has been tapped as Commerce Secretary. Again, that's a pick that makes some sense. According to Politico, Trump put out a statement saying, quote, Lutnick will lead our tariff and trade agenda with additional responsibility for the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Senator Cynthia Lummis suggested, quote, he has been outrageously successful in life under the most adverse setback, on-your-heels circumstance that life can throw at you. And that's a reference to the fact that he rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald after September 11th. That was the terrorist attack that killed 658 of the company's employees, including his own brother. Lummis wrote, quote, Howard rebuilt the business to the powerhouse it is again today and helped make the families who lost loved ones whole financially. So this is a guy who has both a heart and a drive to succeed. So again, Trump is putting together a very solid team here. The team is about breaking things and moving quickly. That is what it is about. And the world is already responding. In just one moment, we'll get ready for a world that knows a new sheriff is on the way. We'll get to that in a moment. First, today we are celebrating a monumental achievement by one of the most prominent and influential voices of our time, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. He has officially reached his 500th show episode. That is correct. 500 episodes of brilliant, thought-provoking, life-changing conversations. It's all available right now at Daily Wire Plus, including his Mastering Life series. It's your personal roadmap to building a life of purpose, strength, and meaning. Coming December 1st, Dr. Peterson is releasing his highly anticipated 10-part biblical series, Gospels, exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. Head on over to Daily Wire Plus right now. Celebrate Dr. Peterson's 500th episode with us today. Meanwhile, the world is already adjusting to President Trump. It's like Joe Biden never existed. I know, it's like his worst nightmare. Joe Biden, he thinks that he built himself a legacy. And then, of course, he was ousted for Kamala Harris, and now he has disappeared into the wilderness, never to be heard from again. But the world is just going right back to what it was before, namely more peaceful and more afraid of America, which is not a coincidence. More afraid of America generally means more peaceful. That is the way the world works. It is unfortunate that that is so. It also happens to be the reality. On a business level, according to the Wall Street Journal, businesses are already beginning to stock up on imported goods before Donald Trump dumps tariffs on China. They're also considering how to cope with the levies if and when enacted, whether they will be able to raise prices, whether they will need to find alternatives to their Chinese manufacturers. When Trump began his trade war against China in 2018, U.S. businesses scrambled to front-load imports before tariffs were implemented, according to the IMF. As a result, the U.S.'s trade deficit with China rose in 2018 before falling in 2019. Already, exports from China surged last month. Some economists think that was driven at least in part by front-loading, people buying the stuff before they think it's going to be tariffed. But all of that is simply a predicate to what happens next, which is a shifting of production outside of China. China is still the world's top exporter of goods, and the U.S. is still its top buyer. American companies bought roughly $430 billion of Chinese goods last year. Computer and electronic products make up the biggest chunk of that. But cut off the American markets to the Chinese, and they do actually have a problem. There's been a lot of talk about China having other markets. That, of course, is true. They've cultivated Latin America. They've cultivated parts of Africa. The United States is an extremely rich market for Chinese product. And we shouldn't just be using our leverage against China. We should be using our leverage against Europe to use against China, because the Western world has to be unified against the Chinese aggression that is burgeoning in the South China Sea and Taiwan Straits. Otherwise, we're going to sleepwalk our way right into a war. The way that actual World War III happens is not by simple accident. It happens when one power actually believes the other power is not going to move or that they have an advantage in moving first. That is how world wars actually happen. They work out of hope. It's not like somebody just fires a shot and magically World War III breaks out. Typically, the situation has to be right in order for everybody to go weapons up. And that's usually when one side misperceives its own strength. Well, if the United States flexes muscle, it'll be much more difficult for China to misperceive its own strength. According to the Wall Street Journal, some economists doubt the U.S. will succeed in raising tariffs to 60% across the board on Chinese products. But economists at Goldman Sachs predict additional duties on China could average out to a 20 percentage point increase in the effective tariff rate, which would be really, really significant. Now, what does that mean? Well, obviously, listen, for American consumers, it means higher prices because that's what tariffs are. It also means a rethinking of America's national security needs vis-a-vis China, which is a good thing. And this also means the United States is going to have to, as I say, increase its leverage on other countries with how they deal with China. According to the New York Times, as they gathered this week in South America, many of the world's leaders were engaged in a delicate diplomatic dance with President Xi Jinping of China. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, called for a consistent, durable relationship with China. Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, pledged to be patient, calibrated, and deliberate. President Biden promised not to let competition veer into conflict. As the United States makes a transition from Biden to Trump, presidents and prime ministers around the world are searching for stability, particularly when it comes to China. Xi told Biden he wanted to maintain a stable, healthy, sustainable relationship with the United States. But potential conflicts with China loom on human rights, the fate of Taiwan, technology competition, cyber attacks, aid to Russia, and tariffs. So the term that's been used for the Trump administration policy on China is decoupling, and that is something that absolutely should be pursued with alacrity. Because continuing to feed the alligator, hoping it will eat you last, is an extraordinarily poor strategy. Now, Xi is issuing warnings to other people in attendance. According to the New York Times, while promising to abide by a commitment to, quote, mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and winning cooperation, the Chinese leader also said, quote, our position of resolutely safeguarding China's sovereignty, security, and development interests remains unchanged. Well, again, this is a place where Donald Trump has led historically. He's going to lead again on this. Donald Trump almost single-handedly drove a bipartisan move against China during his first term. That's a very real thing, by the way. I know Congress people on both sides of the aisle, there are very few things on which they agree. The one thing they agree on is the rising threat of China. Again, this is one of the reasons why I think that Pete Hegseth is going to make a great Secretary of Defense and why I'm urging him to pick as Secretary of the Navy Mike Gallagher, who's been on top of this, really on top of this in terms of defense of the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. So as China grows more militant, it is worth noting, by the way, that all of the sort of happy talk, the world of fantasy that has dominated American foreign policy thinking for years, it's so ridiculous. I mean, truly ridiculous. There's a piece in the New York Times today talking about the fact that China's emissions are growing faster than literally any other place on earth. That for all the talk from John Kerr on how we need to cooperate with the Chinese on climate to save the world. You know who doesn't give a crap about that? China. They do not care. They do not care whatsoever. They're in an exponential growth curve in terms of emissions. Projections show that China is probably going to exceed cumulative emissions over the course of the next few decades. According to the New York Times, for many years, wealthy places like the United States and Europe have had the biggest historical responsibility for global warming. China's astonishing rise is upending that dynamic. Over the past 3 decades, China has built more than 1,000 coal-fired power plants as the economy has grown more than 40-fold. The country has become by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases on planet Earth. It is not close, by the way. The United States has been dropping since about the year 2000. The European Union, the same. China has increased its emissions per year from approximately 4 gigatons in the year 2000 to somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 gigatons today. Last year, for the first time, passed Europe as the second largest historical emitter. That's like cumulative. That includes all the years where Europe was leading at China. Now, China's lying about this. They're promising their emissions are going to peak this decade and then start falling. There's no reason to believe that. Cheap growth is where it's at for China. Now, the New York Times tries to make excuses for China. They say, you know what? In terms of emissions per person, it's still pretty low in China. Right, it's going to increase. Because China, if it does not continue to provide additional layers of economic growth, is going to fail. They have a lot of crises on their hands. They have a demographic crisis on their hands. They have a massive imbalance between the number of young men and young women in their country. They have serious debt crisis on their hands. They have an innovation crisis on their hands. They can steal a lot of tech. But you know who did that also? The Soviet Union. They never really caught up to the United States. So what they're going to rely on is cheap oil, cheap coal, cheap energy. It's the thing they need the most. And they're going to rely on the stupidity of the West in continuing to fund their growth. Well, I think with Donald Trump, a lot of that stuff is going to come to an end. As the Wall Street Journal points out, when Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called for more multilateralism at the opening of the Group of 20 Nations Summit on Monday, their remark appeared aimed at Donald Trump. Many leaders from Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa at the G20 made clear their alarm at the prospects for a sharp U.S. turn inward on trade, health, and environmental policy, with Trump's looming return to the presidency. When they say a turn inward, by the way, what they mean is that the United States is no longer going to sacrifice our sovereign interest to some specious international standard that helps other nations at our expense. That is not a thing that we are going to do. And the reality is other countries are already adjusting, and that is a good thing. According to the Wall Street Journal, some leaders seem more intent on signaling to Trump that they were open to cutting deals that spare their economies and establish defense arrangements from too much disruption. Others sought to remind the president-elect that their countries gave more to the U.S. in the form of investments than they cost Washington in overseas alliance commitments and other favorite Trump targets. You know what I love about this? That other countries are finally thinking of themselves through the prism of what is good for America rather than the other way around. That is a good thing. You know, world leaders, the truth is, Trump is much more predictable than Joe Biden. Because when you speak in the name of airy-fairy ideas, when you just say, we're for democracy, everyone knows that the United States is not going to be consistent in that approach, that some democracies are going to be supported and others are going to be sold down the river. See, for example, Hong Kong. When the United States speaks in terms of human rights, everybody looks at the United States and says, okay, we understand you sometimes care about that, and sometimes you really, really don't. They're right about that. What they're going to get from Trump is something absolutely predictable. If it's bad for the United States, he ain't going to do it. And so that means that they can calibrate their policy around all of that, which takes us to Ukraine. So President Trump is now pushing for both Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin to talk to him, to try and broker a deal, to try to broker an off-ramp as soon as possible. Here's President Trump. He put out this message.
We have never been closer to World War III than we are today under Joe Biden. A global conflict between nuclear armed powers would mean death and destruction on a scale unmatched in human history. It would be nuclear Armageddon. Nothing is more important than avoiding that nightmare. We will avoid it, but we need new leadership. Every day this proxy battle in Ukraine continues, we risk global war. We must be absolutely clear that our objective is to immediately have a total cessation of hostilities. All shooting has to stop. This is the central issue. We need peace without delay.
Okay, but Donald Trump, I promise you, is also not going to simply let Vladimir Putin stroll into Kyiv. Trump is positioned for this. Zelensky knows it. So does Putin. Meanwhile, a bit of controversy has broken out between President Trump and the Republican Senate, not over his nominees, but over the inability of Republican senators to show up on time to vote to stop the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's ramming through of Joe Biden's judicial confirmations. According to Breitbart.com, Trump's comments made on Truth Social followed Senate Democrats confirming a controversial judge Monday night in a close vote, as well as a handful of other Biden picks. Several Republican senators were absent from the vote. Trump tweeted, quote, "The Democrats are trying to stack the courts with radical left judges on their way out the door. Republican senators need to show up and hold the line. No more judges confirmed before Inauguration Day." One of those judges is U.S. Magistrate Judge Embry Kidd for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Well, he was nominated despite the objections of both of his home state senators. Embry has been accused of failing to disclose to the Senate Judiciary Committee two of his decisions to release child sex offenders before trial. He also contributed to a law review article criticizing capital child rape laws as racist. Despite Republican absences, it's possible the Democrats would have been able to confirm the judges anyway. With that said, Republicans failing to show up for their Senate votes is probably not a wonderful thing, considering that, again, many of the Democrats are not currently showing. That included senators like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio. Some of them had conflicts or couldn't make it. But again, the reality is that all of these nominees for the Democrats should receive the full measure of Republican ire and prevention of them from getting on the court. Once they're on, it's almost impossible to get them off. And Donald Trump, of course, is right about this. the Senate should do its job. Which again is just one reason why I think that when it comes to Senate appointments, we shouldn't be relying on recess appointments. The Senate should do its job. That's why the Senate is there. These institutions are there to serve as a check and as a balance. They are there in order to serve, if you're a Republican senator, as vote on President Trump's nominees. And we ought to give a full hearing to each one of these candidates in the same way that I want those senators there to vote against bad judicial nominees. I want those senators there to vote yay or nay on Donald Trump's actual nominees. That is legitimately their job under the Constitution of the United States. Already coming up, we're going to jump into the vaunted Ben Shapiro Show mailbag. Remember, you have to be a subscriber to have your question answered. Become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.